Well, I've got so many references tonight. We're going to start out with Matthew 16:18. What does that say? Matthew 16:18. Everybody ought to know that one by now. You are Peter, but upon this great foundational rock I'll be building my church, and the gates of hell shall not wrestle her down, and I'll be with you unto the end of the age. All right.
I just read that misquoted in the History of the Baptists,
Yeah.
That, and Peter, upon you we will build this church.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I cannot tell you about every Baptist group in the world or in America. Over here, there are very good... I've got about 50 books. Here's two books that go from 1850 to 1935 from the Enon Baptist Association. This is Association of Churches. Quite a few churches. There are 2 volumes here. This is full, all right? These are the minutes and everything of the Enon Baptist Association from 1850 to 1935. All right? Here is Tennessee Baptist. This one's full, all right, of all the churches and all the pastors that were in these churches probably for 200 years. Okay. Here's the history of the Kentucky Baptist. All right. This is the history of them, and it is full also of everything, all the associations, all the different churches. There's the North and the South Carolina. I just grabbed a few of these books. This is the South Carolina Baptist. All right, these are all the churches and what they believed and where they were when they were started.
Was that in the 1850s too, Jim?
Yeah, this one goes from 1670 to 1805. Okay, 1670 to 1805.
The beginning.
This is, we got a couple of hundred years in every one of these books. Then this is the history of the California Southern Baptists, which were not even known as Southern Baptists. They were Southern Baptists. Then I've got to tell you the difference between associations and conventions tonight. How many of you know the difference between association and convention? All right, we're going to study that. The Southern Baptist Convention. All these churches were missionary Baptists. What they were, landmark missionary Baptists. Orthodox landmark missionary Baptists. All that goes about in there. The man that introduced me to the presbytery when I was ordained founded this church that we are in right here. It was not here at that time. And almost every church in the Central Valley, all the way up to Fresno and Madera, Porterville, Dinuba, Porterville, Wasco, Shafter, Lamont, and Arvin. He was the one. His name was Doug Pointer. His children, 2 of his children go here, and his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren go to this church here. All right? And this is a history of the Southern Baptists, and this goes for nearly 100 years. All right? Then we have another book here, Why Association Baptists Divided, and Other Vital Issues. There's Gospel. And then another Baptist source book, all right, about Baptists, specifically Southern Baptists. Okay? All these are here, and I brought them here. And then here is a guy's doctorate that he wrote, Landmarkism, the Beginning, and the Travail that Birthed the VMAA. All right? I even got the Azusa Street Revival down there, which we're going to get into next week, I hope. Associations and conventions. When was the first convention founded in America? When was the first convention founded in America? Come on, this is the test.
1814.
1814. All right. That was basically the Judson Convention. 1814. That was a Judson Convention. Okay. We call it the Judson Convention. It's called the Triennial Convention, and it's known as the Convention of the General Association of American Baptist Churches for the benefit of foreign missions and so on and so forth. It's a long name, a great big long name on it. When was the first association founded in America of churches? the Philadelphia Association in 1707. All right, there were even some others. That was famous. I'm just using it. You see all those books back there. Now I'm trying to cram all this in a real Reader's Digest condensed form. Okay, there were some that were even before this, but this is the most famous one. Okay, this Philadelphia Association. 1707. 1707. There were associations in America in the 1600s. Some Baptists, even this book right here, this is the history of denominations. They start the Baptist denomination in 1612, 1611. But there were Baptists in America before then. Now they start now because they say that John Smith, S-M-Y-T-H, started with John Smith. Was John Smith really ever a Baptist? Was he? What did he do for baptism?
Scoundrel before.
Before. Baptists did. All right. He wasn't a Baptist. Simple as that.
English Baptist from the
That's what you call the General Baptist. All right, the General Baptist. They did start the General Baptist. By the way, if any of you want a tape from what I did this morning, I have some of the CDs on the names of Jehovah. All right, Jehovah titles. I have them with me tonight. Well, associations. An association is like a state association or a interstate associations, like 5 or 6 of them. Association has no power whatsoever. It's like a convention, but it's not. Now, Baptists have been fighting over this for a long, long time. Marilyn, you want to shut that air conditioner down? You guys getting cool now? Okay. We need to shut the air conditioner down. Baptists have been fighting over this one thing. Baptist churches there have been some very, Marilyn, if you'll just turn that whole thing off to the right, control, turn it to the left all the way. There you go. Baptists have taught there are some particular Baptist traits. One of them is they believe in democratic rule, what we call congregational rule. Okay? Now remember, we studied the 11 essential elements of the New Testament church. And their polity is what we call church government. Our word police in English comes from that word. It comes from police in Greek. They believe in democratic rule, that nobody is over them. The pastor is not over the churches. Okay? That's what they've always taught. They always, most Baptists, even the early Mennonites, would not take anybody's baptism. When you come to them as a convert, you were baptized anew. That's why they were called Anabaptist. And they were also called Catabaptist, because they plunged them down. They dipped them. They wouldn't take anybody else's baptism, and almost every one of these groups, if you even look in this book right here, what is the indicative of Baptist? They don't accept other people's baptisms, and they have close communion. What's close communion? Only the members of a particular church take the Lord's Supper. These are some of the things that they taught as Baptists. Okay? Now, you're going to find out John Smith's group didn't practice either one of those things. The group that came from John Smith. They were what we would call Baptists by name only. But all the other Baptists practiced those things. They practiced close communion, and they hardly would even accept the baptism of another Baptist church. When you come to them, you want to be a member of the church, you got baptized. They wanted to make sure that they had scriptural authority of baptism in their churches. Period. All right. Now, conventions, on the other hand, is a corporation that is founded to do a certain job. Now, associations are incorporated also. But associations, now you're going to see this fight. This is a war down through church history. The idea of associations against conventions. I don't see anything wrong with the conventions, and I don't see anything wrong with associations personally. All right? I can accept the Triennial Convention, or I can accept the Southern Baptist Convention, whatever. Because now the Association Baptists say, well, the difference is that the churches don't answer to anybody. Well, they don't really. Churches certainly don't answer to anybody. The association doesn't tell churches what to do, basically. Now, some associations do. The Presbyterians, the different Methodists, whatever, they pretty much hold it over you and tell you what you're going to do, what pastor you're going to have, whatever. Okay? But Baptist associations don't do that, and Baptist conventions basically don't do that, Brother David.
How about doctrinally?
Doctrinally?
Yes. Do the
Okay.
association and convention have control over their
They will make
churches
suggestions to
doctrinally?
the churches. Okay, they make suggestions. This is what we believe. All
if
right.
they get too far out, will they?
Well, if you understand, now a convention that controls churches is really not real Baptist. Okay. Because Baptist churches control their own destiny. Churches, very few Baptist churches in history have ever lasted over 100 and 200 years. Very seldom. We think about churches, we think about church buildings, but very few Baptist churches have ever lasted a real long time. But they're like bees, and so many times Baptists have swarmed from one place to the other. All right? Yes.
Well, like in Jude, it says if a pastor slips in the side door and
yeah.
false doctrine in, and if he's not moved out by the church body itself, what power does the convention or association have?
Okay,
as far
now
as different
Baptist
on
churches,
doctrine?
Baptist
Yeah.
churches are autonomous.
Period.
Okay, period.
Okay.
They don't answer to anybody. Okay, supposedly. Now, by practice, sometimes we do, but we really shouldn't. Most churches, when they found the church and they put in the bylaws of the church, this is beautiful. Almost all Orthodox Baptist churches, Orthodox Missionary Baptist, Orthodox Landmark, other straight old-time Southern Baptist churches, it says that this body of believers, when this church was founded and when this property was bought, this is what we believed. If the majority of this church ever failed to believe these principles, then the minority of the body of this church will be in the majority. And they can control. All right? Now, this is historically Baptist. No other group does this. Only Baptists. And you know why they do that? To protect their property and what the people have done before them and before them and before them. Now, I don't know exactly the bylaws of this church. I knew the bylaws of this church years ago. I don't know what they are today. Okay? But this happens in many. And in associations also. And when they found schools and build buildings, when anybody's got a lot of money involved in putting together a work, they put up bylaws, and this is what we believe. Now, old-time Baptists always believed that if you started a seminary, it was church-controlled seminary. One church controlled it. The old Triennial Convention tried to start schools. The Southern Baptist Convention has started schools, and they've got a lot of money and a lot of people, so they do control the schools. But at one time, I remember not too many years ago, Roger Spradling was on the board of directors in one of the seminaries back there. I think it was Louisville, Kentucky, and that was one of the most liberal seminaries. They didn't believe in the inspiration of the Bible. They didn't even believe in the inspiration of the Bible.
They were changing it around, though, I think.
Yeah, and then he went back. He went in there, and they turned it around. Yes.
Jim Phillips?
Yes. All right.
I'm enjoying it.
Hi.
We got summons for you.
You what? They didn't even believe in the inspiration of the Bible. Well, they fought over that for years and years and years. How'd you hear about the class?
Leanne.
Oh, Leanne. All right.
Where's she at?
I don't know.
Been there for a while.
I haven't been here. She hasn't been here for a while. Now, the difference between associations and conventions is that a convention is set up to send out missionaries. Associations, basically, I don't know, this may be very boring to you coming in the middle of this, but associations are simply a group of churches associating together, okay, to carry out missionary efforts, educational efforts, whatever. And how Baptists fought over the years between the Association Baptist and Convention Baptist, and I was a part of this at one time, these wars and fights, so I know what I'm talking about. For instance, the American Baptist Association. That's what we call the ABA. They're in this book right here. It tells you about all what they believe. They believe that Baptist churches are autonomous. They believe in close communion. They believe in scriptural. They're anti-alien baptism, on and so forth. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on. But they say the Southern Baptist Convention and all conventions are unscriptural.
The American does?
Yeah, the American Baptist. Because they take the power of sending out missionaries. But if you really get down to it, and you really look into it closely, you'll find out that every one of those missionaries is sent out by some church. And it was endorsed by some church somewhere. And the ABA, the BMA, what was called the ABA split in 1950 between the NBA and the ABA, the North American Baptist Association, and the American Baptist Association. And they split over that very issue right there. We studied way back in the 1860s, 1840s. We saw the rise of J.M. Pendleton and J.R. Graves among Southern Baptists. And they held the Southern Baptist nose to the grindstone of the old critical Baptist distinctives that they held to at that time, and they were making sure that they did it. Ben Bogard, J. Lewis Guthrie, and many others, Travis Hubbard, one of my teachers, M.B. Hubbard. Yes.
We came out of the ABA.
Oh, you came out of the American Baptist Association, all right.
And I know Hubbard.
Oh, you know Hubbard?
Yeah.
All right. Travis Hubbard?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. He was my real good friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, last I heard of him, he pastored a church in Lancaster.
He did, but he's been dead for
I'm
quite
sure.
a few times. Yeah,
Sure.
quite a few years now. His daughter and I was like a son to him.
Yeah.
And I was really close to Travis. Boy, I mean,
we know a lot of the same people.
Yeah, he was a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
And he was like my family.
Mm-hmm.
We were together all the time. I was a member of his church
Yeah.
for a while. I did preaching for him, and he preached for me, and all over the place.
Yeah.
Anyway, the ABA. Let's get back to that. In 1905, Ben Bogard, J. Lewis Guthrie, and quite a few number of others, I read them to you here a while back, they brought a declaration for the Southern Baptist Convention. And they said that we need to get back to the deal. You're beginning to have pulpit affiliation and recognizing other people that we don't historically recognize. Well, in 1907, they founded what we call the Old General Convention. And that rocked on until 1924. And then they founded the ABA, American Baptist Association, with Ben Bogard, J. Lewis Guthrie, Conrad, Nathan Glover. You probably know all the names that I'm naming off. Yeah, all right. They were all my teachers. They signed my ordination and things. These guys did.
ABA ordination. Roy Reed.
Yeah, Roy Reed.
D.S. Madden.
Yeah.
And a bunch of those.
Yeah. Well, these names are all very familiar to you guys because I've named them so many times.
Good men.
Yes, they are. Well, they rocked back and forth fighting over these associations over the years. But now you can turn that air conditioner back on just a little bit if you want to. Get a little bit stuffy again. Just turn it up a little. We found the first association 1812 to 1814. Why was the Southern Baptist Convention started? 1845. What in the world went on that they started the Southern Baptist Convention? It was the old Triennial Convention before that. What happened? This is test time, people. What happened?
I didn't write it down.
I can only think of victims.
Over the slave question.
Over the slave question. That's what it was about. They had a few other problems. They wanted to start a school and everything, but the old Triennial Association had tried to start a school. Luther Rice, which was an honest man, he worked with Judson, and they built that deal. It was actually started to build a work that would support Judson and his wife. And you know, they were congregational ministers, and they started over there to India, and they got converted by reading the Bible and trying to set together a defense to defend themselves against Baptists. All right. That's what happened, to defend themselves against Baptists. What is your name, brother?
Blanton.
Blanton. All right. That I know that name too.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people do.
Well, it's a good name.
It
Well, in the early history of Baptists in this country, there was a lot of almost barroom brawls in church meetings. I told you about this. There was the Hard Shells and the Primitive Baptists and the Anti-Missionary Baptists. All the early associations and conventions had to deal with the Anti-Missionary Baptists. They did not believe in sending out missionaries at all. There were four kinds of Baptists to begin with in this country. The regular Baptists. All right? There were regular Baptists, and they were probably the soundest of all the Baptists. And these were they were particular Baptists in this group. Why did they get the particular Baptist name? Remember that? Where'd that particular Baptist business come from?
Hard Shell Baptists, and they were in fatalism.
Well, they were Calvinists.
Calvinists.
All right, Calvinists. Now, just because they were Calvinists doesn't mean they're hyper-Calvinists, okay? Then there were the separate Baptists. All right? Some of these came from the regular Baptists, and some of them came from Whitfield's revivals, remember? In the early part of America. And Whitfield would go out and he would preach, and the regular Baptist would not associate with Whitfield's group, and they didn't want him preaching in their pulpits because he didn't have Baptist ordination. Even though Whitfield was Calvinistic, he believed in salvation by grace and once saved, always saved. They still said that man has no baptism and no ordination. He's nothing but a congregationalist. So they wouldn't have him, and some of them did. So some of them were called the regular Baptists, and some of them were called the separate Baptists because they separated from the regular Baptists. And then we have the Campbellite Baptist. Brother Blanton, you know what that is, don't you?
I'm afraid so.
The Campbellite Baptist.
We still got some of them around today.
Yeah. The Campbellite Baptist. All right, the Campbellite Baptist. How many of you ever heard of Alexander Campbell? We talked about him just a little bit.
Church of Christ.
Yeah. But he wasn't Church of Christ.
Oh, was it?
He was a Baptist to begin with.
Oh, but how did he end up?
He ended up as Church of Christ. And in this one book I have here, it tells when they excluded him from all of their associations. Alexander Campbell. And I read what he believed, if you remember when we brought that out.
Okay, so they excluded him from the associations, but he still did what they wanted in the church.
Well, there was quite a few. In this book, The History of Baptists by John T. Christian, which you're probably familiar with. All right. This is volume 2. It talks about Alexander Campbell, if you want to read this. It talks about Alexander Campbell, page 423, 410, and so on and so forth. Now, Alexander Campbell, when he came on the scene, the Primitive Baptist, the Two-Seed Baptist, the Hard Shell Baptist, all of those, they don't believe in missionaries at all. They don't believe in supporting their pastors either. Now, Alexander Campbell was an extremely well-educated man. And he could set up, and they would come and hear him preach all over. And when he came to America, they let him start preaching, and he was baptized. and he started preaching. Every church and he took whole Baptist associations with him. They became what we call Campbellite Baptist. Finally, his doctrines, he started drawing such tremendous, well, he believed in baptism, regeneration, didn't he? When he first started preaching, he believed that a person ought to repent of their sins and call upon the Lord for salvation, and then you only baptized adults, believers. That's how it started out. Well, it kept getting further and further out of line and further out of line. And of course, many Baptists back then, a lot of these primitive baptisms, they don't want. And if you go back into Europe, when this started, how many of you ever heard of Bach and Beethoven and all that? All these most of these things were church. How about the Hallelujah chorus and all of that? This was started in state-run churches, and they had people that wrote these great masterpieces of music and everything else. But the little old Baptist churches over there, when they said at that time, they said these were great orchestras. But the Baptist says, we're not going to have music in our churches. We're only going to have a cappella. We're only going to sing with our voices. Well, when Alexander came along, there were still quite a few Baptist churches that believed that. They didn't believe in any instrumental music in the churches. Now, Alexander Campbell, he held on to that thing, and he brought his own, what we call the Church of Christ, later on. But for about the first 15, 20 years that he preached, he was a Baptist. And he had one great debate with a pedo-Baptist back there, and the Baptists were all behind him. And you can look at all from about 406, 7, 8, 9, and 10 in this book here. And the second, volume 2 of the History of the Baptist. He debated a well-known pedo-Baptist, and he just whipped him just down bad. And the Baptists rallied around him, the different associations. The Baptists said, boy, great, you did this greater than anybody. And they said he's one of the greatest preachers of all time. But then they just kept carrying the churches off further and further in the area and into error until they finally, as associations, they stood up and said, we cannot endorse Alexander Campbell anymore. He has taken so many of our people. And then they said, no church in this association can associate with Alexander Campbell or his doctrines, bring them in here. He has carried so many of our churches. Now, he made converts all over the place. Now, in the early, we have 4 kinds of Baptists: regular Baptist, separate Baptist, Campbellite Baptist, and then we have the 2 seed, the hard shell, primitive from Daniel Parker, and so on and so forth. Am I doing this all right, brother? Am I coming along? Is it coming along?
I'm having to remember some things.
All right.
What was the third Baptist?
The third one was the Campbellite Baptist. And there are still Campbellite Baptists today. Most of them have become Church of Christ, but some of them are still Baptists.
And what the other one?
All right. 4 kinds of Baptists: regular Baptist, separate Baptist, Campbellite Baptist, and the 2 seed or the hard shell or primitive Baptist. And Daniel Parker was one of their great preachers. Daniel Parker was a weird guy. If you want to listen to Daniel Parker preach today, go on to 91.3 FM and listen to Harold Camping, because that's just about what Daniel Parker preached.
And that's a 2 seed hard shell?
Yes. That's about what he did.
A question about Alexander Campbell. Did he begin his ministry with the proper doctrine, or did it change as
he changed
as his rock star status increased?
Yes, it did. As his rock star status increased, his doctrines changed, and he started carrying people off. I think that he saw the tremendous power that he had over people. You know, many Baptists have no education. The primitive Baptists, they do not want their preachers educated. Primitive Baptists, hard shell Baptists do not have Sunday schools. They do not support any missionaries, period, at all. Okay? They will not do it. God's going to get them saved. He's going to make sure they hear the Word of God somehow. He grab them by the neck and grab them over there and drag them into your church, and they believe that. All right? I'm trying to cover a lot of history. This is my 24th class. We've come all the way from Matthew 16 and Matthew the 4th chapter when the Lord called out His ecclesia until we got them over here to America now, and we're battling.
Now you got a mess.
Yeah.
So the hard shells think that ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. That God will fill your mouth when you get up in that pulpit.
That's a way of control, brother.
Yeah.
Keep them ignorant and you'll keep
You keep them ignorant and you keep them that tight. But one thing about these hard shell Baptists, these two-seat Baptists, I'm going to read you something. See if I can find it here real quick. This is funny. Tracing their thought back to the Waldenses, these two-seat Baptists, boy, they got the right. You know, they do go back right. Baptists have stood for one thing. They stood for baptism and close communion all the way down through the ages. Now, these guys do this still. They believe in the commission to the church, Matthew 16, Matthew 28, 18 through 20. They believe that. They believe in close communion. They believe in all this stuff. But they have gone to seed.
on something.
On some things. All right? One seed was planted by God. The other seed was planted by the devil. All right. The seed is the spirit, not the flesh. It is the cardinal point of theology of the group. Other points include belief in the resurrection of the body of Christ, which is the church, salvation by grace alone. The church observes the Lord's Supper and practices foot washing in some of them. They do not believe in a paid ministry. They don't pay their preachers. The membership is continually decreasing. No missions, no Sunday schools, no paid ministry. Their membership is there's only 16 churches as of 1945 from 201 churches at one time.
Those people that at first they didn't believe in Marion, they died out pretty good too.
Yeah. Well, let's go on. One of the problems of the early churches, Baptists were kind of like the old primitive Baptists and the hardshell Baptists. When Alexander Gamble got up and some of these guys got up, remember when the Temperance League got started? All right, the Temperance League. Well, Baptists, they didn't believe in that. Some of them. And they got up and they preached against the Temperance League and said, it is good to drink. God made all things. Drink it. And of course they smoked and they drank. And they used to say you could tell a Baptist church because of the smoke signals they were sending up between Sunday school and church. Is that true? And they drank a little bit. Well, that's finally basically gone to the wayside now. Now in 1907, we're looking at all the associations and conventions. Remember, a convention is a group, a corporation that's formed to carry out missions, and they pay missionaries and so on and so forth. Now the difference between the BMA and the ABA, all right? The BMA will no longer accept baptism of the ABA. You know why? Because the ABA has association salaried missionaries.
Is that in 1907?
No.
No.
That came later. The BMA and the ABA split in 1950. All right.
Baptist Missionary.
Baptist Missionary Association. And it's Baptist Missionary Association of Oklahoma, Texas, whatever state. All right. So they said the ABA wasn't scriptural because they have salaried missionaries. But in all reality, I don't care whether a convention or association pays the salary of the missionary, the church is put into it, and some church somewhere endorsed that missionary, didn't they? Had come from some church. All right. Well, in 1907, the Triennial Association changed its name to the Northern Baptist Convention.
Mavericks.
The what?
Mavericks.
Yeah. The Northern Baptist Convention. But the only bad problem about... Now, this started out as a good convention, remember, way back in 1814. This is the Judson and all of that. And then the Southern Baptists split from the Triennial Association because they tried to send out a missionary from one of the slave-holding churches, and the Triennial Association, the Judson Association, says, no way. you are not a Christian if you own other people. It ain't going to happen. So they started in 1845, they incorporated the Southern Baptist Convention. All right, that's why the Southern Baptist Convention started. Well, in 1907, the Southern Baptist Convention founded schools, and they were, I tell you what, it's always been a going concern. There's a lot of Southern Baptists. There's more Southern Baptists in the world today than anything else. Any other Baptists, basically. In 1907, the Old Triennial Association founded the Northern Baptist Convention. But the liberals gained control of it real soon. And they had wars and wrestling matches in that group for many, many years. Paige Patterson's father once said, if it hadn't been for J.R. Graves and J.M. Pendleton, that the Southern Baptist Convention would have been where the Northern Baptists were 50 years before. Because they drew them back. Finally, the Northern Baptist Convention in 1950. 1950 is a big year for Baptists, okay? Big year for Baptists. The ABA split from the ABA and the NABA. The Northern Baptists changed their name to the American Baptist Convention. They thought, well, we ought to have a convention, and we ought to start schools, and so on and so forth. In 1973, the Northern Baptist Convention changed its name to the American Baptist Churches of America, or of USA. By that time, there weren't very many sound churches in that group. In 1905, I told you that Ben Bogard and J. Lewis Guthrie, Conrad Nathan Glover, Patterson, I can't remember all the names. I could read them all off to you if I went back, but I slowed down too much. Now you can turn that back off again. They started the Old General Association, 1924, in Texarkana, Arkansas. They took some BMA churches, and they established what was called the American Baptist Association. 1950, the ABA split from the ABA into NABA. In 1922, now this is jumping backwards now, but some of the people left the American, or what they call the North American Baptist, or the Northern Baptist, and they started the Bible Baptist Union. All right, the Bible Baptist Union in 1922. They had three strong leaders. One of them was T.T. Shields, the other one was Riley, and then the other one was J. Frank Norris. Now, J. Frank Norris. J. Frank Norris gave old George Truett such a hard time. And they started what we call the fundamentalists. The fundamentalist Baptist movement. Okay, you ever heard of the fundamentalists?
Sure.
All right. Now, since that period of time with J. Frank Norris, J. Frank Norris was a hard man. He pastored a church in Fort Worth, Texas, and one in Detroit, Michigan at the same time. He stayed 2 weeks at one and then go to the other one. I'm just kind of sliding over all this history. It's because I couldn't tell you all the details, or it'd take me 75 classes. I'm trying to teach you in about 28, 29 classes what I used to teach in 2 years in the CMBI.
Were you there?
Yeah,
So
I was there. I was the professor of Bible languages. That's when Travis left.
70?
Yeah. After Travis Hubbard left.
Wow, boy, did.
Yeah. Anyway, they started a school in Fort Worth, Texas, and they started training Bible students and pastors and Sunday school teachers. Finally, in 1950, the General Baptist Convention split and walked out over some things that J. Frank Norris had done. He was a hard man, and sometimes he'd bring up so-called facts that weren't really facts. And he was fighting everybody. He was a pain in the neck. And you didn't work for J. Frank Norris, you worked for him. You didn't work with him. He was the boss. And some of them got tired, and the biggest part of them went off, and they called it the Bible Baptist Fellowship, the BBF. All right? And they have a college in Springfield, Missouri. And I traced a lot of church history. I was pastor of Baptist churches and everything, and I traced a lot of church history. And this Bible Baptist Fellowship and that college in Springfield, Missouri, really has covered a lot of range. What are the Bible Baptists, by the way? What are they?
You got me?
J. Frank Norris was a typical Bible Baptist. A lot of the different groups have had Bible Baptist pastors. I went and I preached, I guess for a month over here, one little old Baptist church, and they had a Bible Baptist pastor, and they were landmarkers, pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
The church was. Well, when they got them a Bible Baptist pastor, they went round and round. I don't even know whether that church is even still in existence today. A Bible Baptist pastor rules church. He's the boss.
Not a landmark.
But you're not going to do that to a landmark. That ain't going to happen.
You actually going to go to war.
Yeah, they'll go. You start trying to wrangle one of them churches, and you got problems.
They ain't going to work. I'm
Not
talking
gonna-
with them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that church went round and round, and I don't know what. I know that their members were split all over the place. They flew every direction.
They was counting members.
Yeah. Like I said, in Lakeland, Florida, in 1950, the ABA split with the NABA and the BMA of America. Now, a lot of the BMA churches won't take ABA baptism today. There's one out here in Taft. Now, the little old Taft church was Doug Pointer. You know Doug Pointer.
Yeah.
You know his children are here and everything. Anyway, he introduced me at the presbytery when I was ordained a long time ago. Thought a lot of Doug Pointer. He was a great preacher. Preached tremendously simple but stirring messages that really build churches. He would go off in little old tents, and I held up this book earlier when I was telling you the Baptist book, the history of the California Southern Baptists. Doug Pointer is all over this thing. And as a matter of fact, he gave me this book. Well, how many of you ever heard of the GARB?
GARB?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Of the General Association of Regular Baptist Churches. All right. GARB. Now, the ABA and the BMA, every one of those churches, a lot of them won't take baptism from each other. All right.
That's how they punish each other.
Yeah. They work each other over. They exclude each other.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. I remember. I'll tell you something. I went from California, basically from Travis Hubbard over there when I was working with him out there in Lancaster. I moved to Nevada, and I went up there, and the church actually that I was a member of had gone out of existence. They fought themselves out of existence. Okay? So it didn't exist anymore where I was baptized.
I think I'd just soon be called a follower of Jesus Christ than any other name in the world.
But there's reason for it. I want to tell you something. Scriptural
All the fighting
baptism
They just kind
and
of
church.
putting the weeds out.
Yeah. But I went up there, and I went and started working. I worked up there for about 5 years just outside of the church, and I went and worked among the Indians and everything. Finally, there was an old boy that came up there that I really liked. His name was Eddie, and he was working with the Indians up there, and they were building a little old Southern Baptist, independent Southern Baptist mission up there in Fish Lake Valley where I live. So I started going there. That poor old boy couldn't preach for 15 minutes. He just didn't have anything underneath his belt. And he couldn't come to church on Wednesday night, so I started preaching on Wednesday night and Sunday morning sometimes, Sunday nights other times. Boy, he's sitting there like a little bird being fed. And I was just pouring it on, teaching all the things that I teach. But I started to join the church, and they says, where's your baptism? Where's your baptism? Where are you baptized? This is Southern Baptist Church now. Where's your baptism? Well, I said I was baptized by a missionary Baptist church and so in California, but it doesn't exist anymore. Well, we don't take anybody else's baptism except Southern Baptist, and it better be sound.
Nobody baptized me.
Yeah. And he says, if you want to become a member of this church, we'll baptize you.
Okay.
I said, fine.
Yeah.
I'm just tickled to death.
Yeah.
Somewhere around here, I'm going to get scriptural baptism.
You'll suit somebody.
I'd be baptized again today. Wouldn't make me no difference.
I do it every time they told me to.
Yeah.
It ain't going to hurt me.
No, it's not going to hurt me. I take a bath, every now and then.
Yeah, a good testimony each time.
That's right. Because what are you doing? You're protecting the scriptural baptism of that assembly, is what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're doing. Well, we've got down here until we find that in 1932, the old General Association, the Regular Baptists, got it going. Robert Ketchum was one of their leaders, and they had the Baptist Bulletin, and they had the Council of 17 or the Council of 21 that's now ruling this. And some of these churches, they've come out in degrees in different things. They've come out in degrees. Some of those churches are just as sound as a dollar, and other churches, they're not much more than Free Will Baptists. And Free Will Baptists never did have a foundation.
No.
In 1947, the Conservative Association of Baptist Churches of America was started. Now, these are some of the associations, okay? Probably the soundest baptism and Baptist churches today are the ABA churches, the BMA churches, the GARB churches, and the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't think anybody can trace their baptism back any sounder than the Southern Baptist Convention churches, in all reality. Because J.R. Graves, J.M. Pendleton, and all of those, Benjamin Marcus Bogard, I've got a, I believe it's this one. All right.
Say soundest baptism or soundest doctrine?
The soundest baptism and the soundest doctrines. The soundest baptism is important. Like Brother Blanton there said, he submitted to baptism several times, so have I, and I'll just keep on doing it.
But baptism and doctrine go hand in hand.
The baptism and the doctrine in Baptist churches. Baptist churches trace themselves all the way back to Christ. Now, they try to start us over there in 1611 and 1612 in England. That's a bunch of baloney. John Smith never was a Baptist. Here, again, the section 4 of controversies, and this is the Baptist Source Book by the Southern Baptists. All right. Here in 1905, a memorial from representations of 52 Baptist churches in Arkansas holding landmark views. Those that signed these were Benjamin Marcus Bogard, J.B. Selman, J.K.P. Williams, J.T. Tucker, A.J. Robbins, J.H. Kirkendall, and J.Y. Freeman. These are all very famous names among Baptists. The Southern Baptist Convention didn't listen to them like they wanted to, so that's when they started the old General Association.
It became a personality thing.
Uh-huh. And then the old General Association in 1924 became the American Baptist Association. That's where that comes from. Baptists have fought all the way down through the ages. The most important thing about a Baptist church is its independence and autonomous. It's autonomous and independent from all other groups, any association or convention, period. Is that right, brother? That's Baptist. And even in this book, where it talks about the handbook of denominations in the United States, it will tell you one thing about real Baptists, that they all hold very closely and they guard their baptism as if it came from the Lord, because they believe that. And I do believe that too, Matthew 16:18. Thou art Peter, but upon this gigantic foundation rock I shall be building my church, and the gates of hell will not wrestle her down. It's not going to happen. In faith alone, we have to believe that as Baptists, that our baptism has come all the way down through all these years, and it's scriptural today. I believe that we ought to honor each other churches, as like the Southern Baptist Convention, the ABA, the NABA, the BMA, and all these things. I mean, right today, if I went out to join that church in Taft out there, I'd have to be baptized again, and I'd say thank you. I know one thing, they got a good history. They have a good history. I've studied the history of all these churches. One time, a church went and had me to study the history of that church, and this was a landmark church. You know where I traced that church to, brother? John R. Rice Revival in Texas. A Bible Baptist baptism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that was a sad situation. I told the church, and they said, shut up. Well, it was true. Sometimes it doesn't go just exactly like... And that church had been reorganized. Remember Lee Wright?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
All right.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah. Lee Wright had reorganized the first Missionary Baptist Church in Bakersfield because it had come out of the Taft Church, which had good baptism, and they got this other baptism, and I traced that baptism. That baptism went back to John R. Rice, which is a Bible Baptist. All right. Why, Benjamin Marcus Bogart had a debate with John R. Rice one time, didn't he? Over the Universal Church. Well, as we study church history with the Baptists, most Baptists recognize at least a modified form of the New Hampshire Confession of Faith with alterations. All right? And that's basically, if you go to the Southern Baptist Convention, what they suggest. They suggest to the churches that this is their confession of faith, and Roger Spradlin and a bunch of them, they got together and they figured all this out. And you can get the little book, Baptist Distinctives. Some of the landmark churches, some of the two-seed churches, and I mean landmark churches. You ever heard of New Lighter?
Oh, good grief. City of Cain?
Yeah.
I'm afraid they get crashed in front of me if I walked up to them.
Well, we got a few of them in Bakersfield.
Oh, yes, we do.
We got a few of them in Bakersfield.
We got them all over.
Yeah.
California, anyway.
Yeah. They believe that salvation is in that church only.
Period. They're nuts.
Yeah, that's what you call Catholicism, Warmdorf.
Nothing but
Catholicism.
Nothing but Catholicism.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's Catholicism.
Just different names.
I guarantee you, if you go into some of these churches and you clap your hands after somebody preaches or something, they're going to get ushered out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You bet. Yeah.
Or if you listen to somebody else's gospel records, you'll be shunned.
Well, don't you listen to anybody else, period.
Yeah.
Because you're nailing the truth. And they don't like that.
Well, these are all, now this is what we call schisms and cultism.
Yeah.
All right.
And follow right around the man.
Yeah. Right around the man.
Yeah.
What you need to do is you need to know the history of the Baptists. Now, we've studied the history of the Baptists. We've got it all the way down to America today. And it has said in the Baptist, every church is set up by a certain standard of beliefs. And like I said, in most Baptist churches, especially the old missionary Baptist churches. By the way, how did missionary Baptist churches get their name? How did it come about?
Who gave it to them, you mean?
Yeah.
Probably somebody else.
Well, no, they gave it to themselves. Because they believed in missions. They didn't believe in hardshellism. They were not hardshells, so they called them missionaries, missionary Baptists. And then because they said that we believe the truth, we called Orthodox missionary Baptists. And then after J.M. Pendleton and J.R. Graves came along, they called themselves Orthodox Landmark Missionary Baptist Churches. And if you look in all the old Southern Baptist churches, that was their names. A Dud Pointer. It's in there. Every one of these churches. Because that meant something. Missionary Baptists meant they believed in sending out missions. In almost every church, in the minutes and the bylaws of the church, it says, if even a minority of this group of people vary from the bylaws of this assembly when it was founded, that the minority will be in the majority.
Yeah.
All right. I know that the old Glory Garden Church was that way. That's where Roy Reed was.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. And we remember that.
Oh, you remember there?
Yeah. After it was And turned into regular First Missionary Baptist
First
Church.
Missionary Baptist Church. Roy Reed was a good friend of mine.
He is a great.
He's a great man,
one of
great
the
leader.
men in our
When he
work.
died, that school just went to pieces.
Yeah. Boy, they were fighting him before he died.
Yeah.
He went to wolves.
Yeah. Oh, he was a good man.
Yes, he was.
I thought the world of Roy Reed.
He was our pastor for
Mm-hmm.
4 years while we were at CMBI.
Yeah.
Really great man.
I don't know how long. I was there at CMBI for about 12 years.
Well, you knew some of the same people I did.
I knew some of the greatest teachers in the world.
Yeah.
They were some of the greatest
They
teachers
did
in the
good
world.
work.
Yeah, did good work, and it has gone all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was the professor of Bible languages there after Brother Hubbard left.
Yeah.
He was I was his right-hand man. He was my right-hand man.
He was your mentor.
Yeah. He was a great man of God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go back. Now we studied Baptists. We got to go back in church history. How in the world did the mess get out there in the denominations that we got today?
Because some people didn't study the Bible.
Yeah. Well, we had, remember we studied a couple of weeks ago, we studied about John and Charles Wesley.
Mm-hmm.
They came from Europe to America, and they came over here and they were going to do mission work. And they weren't even saved. They didn't even know the Lord. They got over here and they started doing mission works, and the Baptists kept talking to them, and they just knocking the wind out of their sails. Finally, they went back to England. They got over there and they got saved. And they never wanted to leave the Church of England.
Yeah.
Their study, what's called their method of study, was that they would study the Bible. Now, they were the old holiness movement. The holiness movement, the Holy Rollers, came from these Methodists.
Yeah.
Okay? If it hadn't been for Baptists, those John and Charles would have never got saved. But they wouldn't come all the way to the truth.
Well, Church of England is nothing but the Catholic Church.
Well, it's warmed over Catholics, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when Whitfield started preaching here in America, and they had the great revival, there was a man that was more sound than Whitfield. Whitfield was a Calvinist, wasn't he? All right, he believed in salvation by grace and everything. Many of the Baptist churches would not accept him. They were called the regular Baptist churches, and the ones that separated from the regular Baptists and listened to Whitfield, they were called separate Baptist churches, separatist. And Whitfield's revivals, he could preach to 5,000, 10,000 people at one time, and they could hear his voice. He had such a great speaking voice. And he was educated, man. And you have to remember that the Baptists over in this country were pretty uneducated because they weren't supporting their pastors. So the pastors, they just read the Bible, they'd get up and whatever they had. Baptists in early church history always knew the original languages. And that's where I've shined all of my life.
They learned to read and write that way.
Yeah, read and write in Greek and Hebrew.
Yeah.
The early Baptists, when they come to this country, things just went to pieces as far as education goes. And that's where we got the hard shell and the 2C, the primitive Baptists, that didn't believe in education. And they, to this day, will not have a Sunday school in their churches. All right?
Yes.
Well, as they went out and they started listening to George Whitfield, Whitfield was an enthusiastic preacher, and he would get people so emotionally worked up that some of them would absolutely fall out and faint and just go into tizzies. Well, the regular Baptists didn't like that.
No.
They wouldn't have him in their pulpits. They didn't believe in pulpit affiliation. Baptists haven't believed in that doctrinally, distinctly, all down through the ages. Well, Jonathan Edwards preached. The more Jonathan Edwards preached and the more that he studied, and he was a Puritan, and Whitfield was a Congregationalist. But Edwards was a Puritan. That man had a mind on him. The more he studied, and he pastored, and he preached, he's the one that preached at sinners in the hand of an angry God. You know, that's a great message. It's been historical. Jonathan Edwards, the more he studied, the more he became a Baptist. Finally, he got kicked out of the Puritans because he started teaching that only adults should be immersed and baptized, and that every church ought to practice close communion. Because how could you admit anybody into your communion and the Lord's Supper unless they were living right? So he started teaching this, and, well, they kicked him out. He just didn't preach at all for quite a while. He was just studying and writing and teaching. That's all he did. One of the greatest minds. That's where the New England theology comes from, is Jonathan Edwards. But he would go behind and he would study Whitfield's group, and he saw that much of the revivals that Whitfield had in America, and this is what we call the Great Awakening, that many of those people, they would go to church when the revival was there, but after it was over with, they just went back to their old way of life and just did their own thing. Jonathan Edwards says that a real saved person has a saved change in their life. And they really repent, and they go on serving God. The method, John and Charles Wesley came behind Whitfield and established Methodist churches. And that's where we have the circuit riding Methodists on the mules, you know, the old story about the circuit riding Methodists. And they gathered up a lot of Whitfield's people. And they were very emotional people. And back in England, there were places over there that these Methodists, they were talking about being fire baptized. Fire baptized Methodists. You ever heard of those terms?
Oh, yes.
All right. In the Apostolic Faith Mission in 312 Azusa Street in 1906, in America. This is where we have the beginning of the charismatic movement. William J. Seymour, he was a Methodist, all right? And the holiness movement, the Pentecostal movement, all of this became very concentrated in the Azusa Street revival. And here's a picture of the guy. William J. Seymour, an African-American, was born May the 2nd, 1870 in Centerville, Louisiana, to former slaves, so on and so forth. But he started a healing service, and they started talking in tongues down there on Azusa Street in 1906. And this thing went on for about 4 years. People were coming from all over. There was even some Baptists going down there. I think Ben Bogard went down there, if I remember right, at that time, and took a look at this bunch of hyenas.
We went into a church in L.A. She and I saw a church baptized by the fire and the Holy Spirit Missionary Baptist Church.
All right.
Yeah, we thought that was something else.
Well, that's kind of unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Seymour.
Yeah, Seymour. Well, that doctrine spread all over. You know, people want a God that they can see and a religion they can feel. Don't they? They want to be able to see a God. That's why Catholicism is so attractive to people, because they can worship a God. They can get him on a cross there and put him around their neck, go and bow down to him, kiss the cross, go down and kiss all them altars, go through the 7 stations of the cross in every church up there, and they can feel and they can see and they can touch their God.
They're superstitious.
I preached this morning. I preached right here at 9:15, but I preached again at 11 o'clock in another little old Baptist church, and I preached John the 4th chapter. And Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman there, and he told her that God was a God that you worship in spirit and truth. One of the greatest things about worshiping God, the real God of heaven, is that we have to worship Him in spirit. We can't see Him. We have to believe that He is, as the book of Hebrews says. But this group had a God that they could feel, and a God that they could see, and a God that they could touch, and they could get involved with Him. And they cast out demons. Well, I'm sure there's demons in some people. Don't you think so? Huh?
Some people are demons.
Yeah. I've known that some that were basically totally controlled. All right? Right here, the Los Angeles Daily Times, Wednesday morning, April the 18th, 1906. Weird babble of tongues. A new sect of fanatics is bubbling over. What a deal that happened down. It spread all over the world.
Is that where the beginnings in speaking in tongues came from? Was this place?
Well, speaking in tongues went all the way back to Babylon. Went all the way back to Nimrod. Went all the way back to those prophets of Baal. That's exactly what they were doing. That's the word in Greek. That's mantoumene. Mm-hmm. That means to go into. In Acts 16:16, that woman was speaking in tongues that kept following Paul around. That's exactly what she's doing. And those the oracles that they would receive, they had some old woman or somebody sitting over this hole in the ground out there in a chair, and she would breathe these vapors, and then she would speak in the language of the gods, and then the priest would interpret it. That never happened in God's churches. That never happened in God's churches. But this is for the speaking in tongues and interpreting goes on. This all came from paganism.
Demonic.
It's demonic.
This would not
Mantuamene. What?
This would not sound anything in 1906. This wasn't being interpreted.
This was a fantastic new revolution in religion. And I'm going to tell you something. The charismatic movement is the binding of the tares, Brother Carl Farrar used to say.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He's a great man.
Can you write that word on the board so I can look it up when I get home?
Mantuamene?
Yes.
Something like that.
His handwriting ain't no better than mine.
Read to me.
Can't write in English. All right. Mantuamene. If you go to Acts 16:16, you look that verse up right there, you're going to see that word spelled out in Greek. Okay? And if you go to the Septuagint in the Greek Old Testament, you're going to see it spelled out back there also. Now this is Azusa Street revival. Who took off after the Azusa Street revival? We saw all kinds. You ever hear of A.A. Allen?
Yeah.
All right, A.A. Allen. I want some of his revivals. How about Amy Semple McPherson?
Oh, very simple.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Benjamin Marcus Bogard had a debate with her,
yeah.
the Semple or the McPherson Bogard debate.
Yeah.
And there she is right there.
Yeah.
That's her own book.
Yeah.
This is that.
She was such a fake.
Yeah. This is that.
Yeah.
Well, Amy McPherson took right off from the Azusa Street revival. That's where it all began. This is all the charismatic movement. Now, what great group of churches in America today are founded upon Amy Semple McPherson? What did she call her churches?
Assembly of God.
Well, no. What was it?
Four
Square.
Yeah.
Four Square churches.
Yeah.
Four Square churches all over the place. The most rapid growing churches in America today, they don't say this a lot, but if you ask the leadership, what are you? And they'll say Four Square churches, and that's Calvary Chapel, Chuck Smith.
Okay, so Amy Semple McPherson founded the
Four Square Church.
Four Square Church.
Mm-hmm. And buildings are still in L.A.
Yeah.
Calvary Chapel here in Bakersfield.
Calvary Chapel came from the Four Square churches. Did you know it? Calvary Chapel came from the Four Square churches.
Yeah.
You're educated, man.
I have a brother who was at one time a member of Calvary Chapel, but he left them a long time ago. But there's some people, other people here in the church who were members of that, and most of them left.
All right, we have the charismatic movement. Charismatic movement covers all groups of people. The Baha'is speak in tongues. Did you know that?
I knew.
Muslims speak in tongues.
What is the Baha'i? I see it. I don't know what that.
It's kind of a form of Muslim.
Oh.
Their Baha'i center is in Tel Aviv. I've been to that. I was over there walking through that with B.S. Madden.
You know with Boots?
Yes, I know him. I knew him well.
Yeah.
I helped build his house that he lived in when he retired back there.
Really?
The Mormons speak in tongues.
Yeah.
Did you know that? Well,
Who was it? You said the Baha'i, the Mormon,
Baha'i,
and
the
what was
Mormon.
the other group?
many groups of Tibetans, the Tibetan monks, they speak in tongues. They speak in tongues. That's what Brother Madden used to call spiritualist. Spiritualist. All right. The Book of Mormon and the doctrine of the Pearl of Great Price and Doctrine and Covenants, and the Doctrine and Covenants of the Pearl of Great Price. I'll get it straight in a minute. All of these things. Now I got to find my book here. All of this stuff came upon the world. All these denominations. You know, we studied Martin Luther, we studied John Calvin, and all these Protestants. But I'm still a Baptist. Smith. Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was basically a corn harvest in his time. And
Diviner.
yeah, a diviner. He was looking for some way to get rich quick.
Pretty good job, dude.
Power and control.
Power and control.
Money. It was money.
What was all these symbols and stuff he was involved with? What they mean?
Well, let's get back to that. Joseph Smith was a Mason in a Masonic lodge. He stole many of his rights from the Masonic lodge. You probably knew that too. I'm sure you didn't. You knew that? Yeah. All right.
Almost everything they do.
He, I talked to a Mormon the other day, and we were talking about. He said, and I was talking about church history, and he says, I said, yeah, all the secret rites and stuff. What he said, what did they think about the secret rites in the Mormon church? And I said, well, Joseph Smith was a Masonic in the Masonic lodge one time, and he took all those secret rites and stuff into the Mormon church that he founded. He said, how'd you know that? Well, Joseph Smith lived between 1830. I got to find him here. Joseph Smith Jr., 1805 to 1844. Now, one of the big things about that then, you know, I'm an Indian. Even though I'm bald-headed from this radiation and chemotherapy. My people are all Indians. Well, you know, the God of the Bible says how the Indians got over here. Very plainly. When God confused the language, it says, in the days of Peleg, God divided the earth. We got over here right then. Right here. This is a chart that Brother Ferrari used to have in his classroom. Remember seeing this chart before?
I've had this.
All right. That was down there. And when you walked into the old building, right in the first classroom, that chart just like this was hanging right up in there. Just like that. That's one of the best teaching tools I've ever had. When God divided the languages, He also divided the land. And that's how the Indians got here. We are not Jews. Now, the Book of Mormon says that they got in a boat thereof, and they drilled a hole in the top thereof, and a hole in the bottom, and this boat went underneath the water. It was a submarine. Yeah. And when you drill a hole in the top thereof and the bottom thereof, what happens to a submarine? It sinks thereof. All right. King James, Joseph Smith was real addicted to King James English.
Yeah.
All right.
He's a weird character.
Whoever wrote that.
But he was a real con.
He's smart.
But he was smart.
He knew how to
control people.
Yeah.
He got everything he wanted, except he got an early death because he was revolutionizing.
Not early enough.
No, not early enough. If he died a little earlier, we wouldn't have Mormons to deal with today. A lot of people have gone to hell because of that man.
Yeah.
All right, he was looking for buried treasures. He attempted meeting revivals, and his family went from one church to the other. They were ever confused. So Joseph Smith, he starts his own group. He says he found these golden plates, and that he was supposed to restore Christ's church on April the 6th, 1830. The Church of Christ of Jesus, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what it was later called. Well, he had a son, and then of course we know about Brigham Young and all of them going across the country but their great foundational doctrine is that the American Indians are the lost tribes of Israel, and that we're Jews. Well, Indians, we have never said we were Jews, period. We said that God put us on this continent, and we were here. This is where we're supposed to stay. And we're supposed to live like God said we were supposed to live. Well, that's what happened. Now we have this DNA.
Yeah, that got them.
That got them, brother.
That got them.
They find us slant-eyed Indians,
Yeah, that got them.
or Oriental in our roots.
Yeah, that nailed them. But just like with everything
But
else.
then they said you have to believe it by faith.
Yeah,
Somehow it got messed up.
yeah. Well, that's all they could say.
Well, all during this period of time. Now, we studied 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, how that Baptists helped establish the religious freedom in America, because America was never supposed to be a freedom of religion. Every colony that was found in America was a state church colony.
Yeah.
Rhode Island, when Dr. John Clark and Roger Williams, John Clark established the first church, Baptist church in America in 1638 in Newport, Rhode Island. Roger Williams worked with, for a while, a General Baptist church that they founded in 1639 in Newport, Rhode Island, or Providence, Rhode Island. Now, those churches were established here, and the Baptists shed blood, and they fought so hard for the American Revolution so they could have finally in the world one place where they had freedom of worship. And the Baptists in Rhode Island, they gave anybody. You could be anything you wanted to be. They had Obadiah Holmes, John Gano, these people, John Clark, these people were horsewhipped so many times. Obadiah Holmes was whipped so bad that he couldn't lay down for 3 or 4 months after he was whipped for preaching the gospel. John Gano was in prison also. They were in prison for preaching the Word of God. Well, Baptists, one Baptist preacher says, go out, get all these Baptist churches together and all these volunteers to go in the Revolutionary Army. He said, get them all out here, get all your swords together, get a big punch bowl, and cut your arms and bleed your blood into that punch bowl. And you swear by your own blood. You put all the blood in that punch bowl, and then you take your swords and you baptize your swords in that punch bowl. And you say, we will not sheath these swords until America is free and we have freedom of religion. Baptists fought harder for the American Revolution, I guess, than any other people, according to George Washington. John Gano baptized George Washington. George Washington was a Baptist. And with his great influence, and with Thomas Jefferson's influence, he went into a Baptist church meeting one time, business meeting, and he said that was the greatest form of democracy he ever saw in existence. Roger Williams was greatly influenced by Baptists, but he was also influenced by the Native American Indian tribes, because every Indian tribe from the Atlantic to the Pacific was a pure democracy. He said, these people lived this way for thousands of years. He said, white people can live in a democracy also. And of course, he pushed democracy. And of course, he got turned out in the middle of the winter and everything else to die by the Puritans. The Puritans did not believe in freedom of religion.
None of them Puritans, if they believe in that.
They didn't believe in freedom. All of them were state churches. There was a lot of controversy going on in America. Finally, in this country, we have freedom of religion. And because of what Baptists gave to America, freedom of religion, come along with freedom of religion comes upon responsibility also. That's how all the cults got started in this country. Because now we have freedom of religion.
We're going to have to start back over again.
We may have to go back the other way a little bit. I don't know. But now, because of the freedom of religion in America, when did all this begin? In the early 1800s, when all the cults began. All right? We have Mormonism. We have your Seventh-day Adventists.